Good morning, everyone. We're just going to give it a few minutes to make sure everyone gets into the presentation.
Good stuff.
Just while we're waiting, has anyone got some good insights into what they've seen change over the last couple of weeks with foot traffic and activity in the Yonge Dundas neighborhood? Anyone got any stories or observations that they'd like to share? Seeing none, I will start by saying that we have had confirmed yesterday that IKEA is opening on May the 25th, which is, I believe, next Wednesday. So we are very much looking forward to the activity and focus and traffic that I hope will bring into the Yonge Gerrard intersection specifically. So for those of you who are not aware, that's happening middle of next week.
At what address are they opening?
Pardon?
What address?
It's the Aura building on the northwest corner of Yonge and Gerrard. I don't know the street number. It's 300 and something. I have to look
Good
it up.
stuff. Thank you.
You're welcome. I sense a South African accent.
Absolutely. You got it right on. I've been out of the country for a number of months, just having gotten back. So I haven't done the walk. That happens tomorrow afternoon.
Excellent. I am from Durban.
Good stuff. I sort
Right?
of think mine's more pronounced coming from the wine district.
I can make it more pronounced if I've had wine, which is probably the trick there.
Good stuff. You've got a good sense of humor. You are South African.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
I have this theory with all my colleagues in the office that South Africans are everywhere. You just have to look for them. And they didn't believe me when I first told them, but now they have come to understand that we are a gigantic diaspora.
Absolutely, and you've got to make them aware because they're not as smart as us South Africans.
Woohoo!
Kidding. All good.
There's that South African sense of humor, Roy.
Yep. Thank you.
All right, we're going to give it literally another 2 minutes, and then we will kick off. Anyone else got any observations? Any other South Africans on the call that I should be aware of in advance? Susie, is there anyone else in the waiting room? All right,
Yeah, I think we can start.
I think we should get going. So we've got a lot of hopefully interesting stuff to get through. So let me start by saying welcome everybody. This is our Downtown Yonge economic update, looking specifically at the road to recovery post Tay Julian, post COVID-19, or at least as we move out of COVID-19. Let me introduce our amazing data person, Susie Barbosa-Pizzirusso, who is also our Economic and Community Development Coordinator and has led the charge through the pandemic of trying to understand how are demand patterns shifting, how is the neighborhood being affected, and what information can we share with our member businesses and property owners and colleagues and stakeholders in terms of helping them plan as recovery starts to take a foothold. A couple of things from our side, just to say that many of you will already know, but for those of you who don't, our fearsome leader, Mark Garner, of the last 10 years, has moved to the Downtown Calgary, or Calgary Downtown Association, and in fact has just finished his
light
first...
switch is connected in there, so it's working properly now.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Still gonna have the electrician.
Has just finished his first week in Calgary, is of course terribly missing Toronto. I just put that out there. And in the meantime, if you have any questions, queries, or comments, or need anything from us or from the team at Downtown Yonge, I'll be acting as the interim executive director while the board goes through its recruitment process. So please don't hesitate to reach out if there's anything we can do to support and help. And if you have any ideas on ways that we can support and help through the business community. The final thing I wanted to note is that many of you have been asking about bringing foot traffic back to the neighborhood, bringing demand back to the neighborhood. In addition to today's presentation, I also want to mention that our amazing events team is launching their summer event series starting on June the 8th of 2022. And our Play the Parks, which is our concert series, is being launched at Yonge Dundas Square on June the 22nd from 5 p.m. to 8 p.m. All of that will be shared on social media. We'll be doing e-blasts once we have all the marketing material, but I just wanted to give you a heads up from the point of view of looking for foot traffic, looking for ways to market and promote the neighborhood. All of those things are starting in June as we get back to what I hope will be a very, very active and busy summer. So without further ado, let me pass it over to Susie to give you a really good overview of how this neighborhood has fared under the pandemic and as we move through it. Susie.
Thank you, Pauline. Thank you all for being here today. Just a note that this session is being recorded and we will be sharing it with members once it is finished. So yes, here we are at the economic update for spring 2022. First, we'll go through a quick agenda for today. The first section we'll look at is the changes in demand in Downtown Yonge, and specifically we'll be looking at from September 2021 to February 2022. And we'll look at the visitor analysis. So those are people who are coming into the area who don't live within our boundaries, and then the resident analysis as well. After that, we'll look at some key findings from other companion research projects. These include the SRA Occupancy Index, which looks at the occupancy in the office towers in downtown Toronto, the core of downtown Toronto, not just Downtown Yonge. And this has been updated semi-monthly from May 2020 to April 2022. So we'll get a really great sense of what sort of happened throughout the last 2 years and what the sort of early recovery is looking like in early 2022. Pauline will also go through the Safe and Inclusive Neighborhood Survey with you after the SRA Occupancy Index. We just did it in September 2021, so we'll give you the update on that. We've also just recently done a retail mix study in February, looking at street front retail and as well as mall retail, and seeing what has been happening in the retail sector in the neighborhood. And next, we'll go through a pedestrian flow analysis. So in case you don't know, we do have the traffic counters along Yonge Street, and we've had them there for a couple of years now. So we'll be looking at some pedestrian flow analysis between January and April, and we'll be able to compare it from 2019 to 2022 and seeing, again, what has happened in the last 2 years and what recovery is looking like. And lastly, we just recently in February did a member survey, which I'm hoping that all of you were able to fill out. And we'll go through a few of the results from that survey to better show you kind of what our members have been asking us for, what they would like us to focus on during recovery. And finally, after this presentation, we will have a handout that sort of summarizes a lot of these points, and we'll kind of go through that, and we'll share with you some upcoming data updates. So let's just dive right into the changes in demand in Downtown Yonge, and specifically how this data was collected. So the data we looked at, again, is visitors coming into the area and the movement patterns of the residents within a 2-kilometer radius of Yonge and College. Now, we will be showing you, once we get to those sections, a map specifically showing you what that looks like, what that 2-kilometer radius looks like, and what the boundary is in terms of considering what a visitor is. So don't worry about that. The way this was collected is a proprietary mobility data collection method by Environics Analytics, and they use cell phone geolocation tags to understand the mobility of the visitors and the residents. And the data collected we started collecting this data in March of 2020, and so we've got up until February 2022. So we will be showing some of that historical data, but the majority of the data will be from September 2021 to February 2022. So first we'll start off with the visitor analysis. So here you'll see the map of sort of what is considered a visitor in this particular sense. So a visitor is anyone who entered our geofence during the analysis period. Now you'll see that red line there in the map is the geofence, and that is the Downtown Yonge BIA boundaries. So just in terms of context, the boundaries are Bay Street to the west, Richmond Street to the south. On the east side, we sort of do a squiggly line around Ryerson, but it's essentially Church Street on the east side. And then on the north side is Grosvenor Street. So those are our boundaries. And that's kind of what is considered a visitor, is anyone entering that area during the analysis period. So you'll see here is sort of the heat map of what happened between September 2021 and February 2022. So the darker the color, the more people came from those particular areas. And we've highlighted a few of the neighborhoods that were sort of the more popular ones where people came from. So you'll see there on the top left, there is Forest Hill there. And then on the right-hand side, we've got Rosedale, lower Don Parkland area. U of T, that's sort of been a consistent area that has been pretty much always in the darker color throughout the pandemic. And obviously there are a handful of areas within sort of a 5-10 minute walk from the Downtown Yonge boundaries themselves. And then lastly, the Portlands and the Islands were also a fairly popular area where people were coming from. Now, in terms of the demographics of visitors, interestingly, this has not actually really shifted all that much throughout the pandemic. It has stayed largely pretty much the same. It's an average 1 to 2 person household with a university degree, white collar, high visible minority. The household maintainer is under 44 years old, and 36% of the households have children at home. In terms of the average household income, you'll see here that before COVID-19, for our visitors, the annual average was about $115,000 as the average household income. As of February 2022, we saw that our average household income actually increased quite a bit and is now sitting at around $123,000. And this fluctuated quite a bit during the COVID-19 pandemic, but we've really kind of seen a shift in it being significantly higher now in the earlier months of 2022. Now, in terms of how far visitors are coming from, this was sort of the very interesting piece to sort of see the different stages of the pandemic and how the mobility patterns of visitors were really changing as time was going on. So you'll see here between March and August of 2020, we saw that the majority of our visitors were really not coming from very far. 50% of our visitors lived within a 26-minute drive of the area, and 70% of the visitors lived within a 33-minute drive of our area. Now, as the pandemic was sort of going on, we saw those numbers slowly increase. So between September 2020 and February 2021, we saw that 50% of our visitors live now within a 31-minute drive, and 70% of them lived within a 38-minute drive. So really a small increase, but we're definitely getting there. Prior to COVID, we tended to see a lot of our visitors were actually coming from further away. So this was really sort of veering back to that pre-COVID, those pre-COVID numbers. When we looked at March to August 2021, so a year into the pandemic, we saw that more than half of our visitors lived within a 37-minute drive. And then over 70% of our visitors lived within a 48-minute drive. And now when we look at our current numbers, so September 2021 to February 2022, it's really kind of grown a lot over the last 2 years. We're seeing now that 50% of our visitors live within a 39-minute drive, and 70% of our visitors live within a 50-minute drive. So that's really quite far away, and we're really kind of seeing those patterns shifting, and you'll see that throughout the presentation as well. In terms of the visitor volume count here, so you'll see we'll kind of go through all the different colors because there is quite a bit going on. So the lighter blue color you'll see there is 2019. Now you'll see that it only starts in March because we started collecting this data in March of 2020 and it was a new data set. So they weren't collecting this data prior to March of 2020 and the earliest data that they had was March 2019. So you'll see that 2019, those lighter blue bars was, sort of a normal year pre-COVID. 2020 is that darker blue color. You'll see that January and February were kind of a normal year because obviously everything started in March, and even March is sort of a pretty average number overall. And then of course you see that really large dip in April 2020 through to the rest of 2020 in December. The pink color is 2021. So you'll see that January, February, March, and basically into May, we're sort of still a fairly low numbers for our visitor counts, but really started to increase as the summer came, as the warmer weather came, and as restrictions were easing, and really kind of peaking there at December 2021. You'll see here that that pink bar is really kind of close to what it was in 2019. 2022 is those green bars. Obviously, we only have January and February, but really some very positive numbers here, where February was almost pretty close to what we saw in February 2020, which basically was pre-COVID. So really hopeful, and you'll see it also in the pedestrian counts that it's really, everything has been increasing fairly well over the last couple of months. And then here we just show you some of the percentage increases. So in January, we saw a 41% increase in 2022 when we compared it to 2021. And in February, we saw an 85% increase in 2022 when we compared it to 2021. Now, in terms of where they're coming from, again, this was something that really did not shift all that much throughout the entire pandemic. These two postal codes were the top two postal codes over the last 2 years of where visitors were coming from. So M4Y and, sorry, I can't see there, M5A, both accounted for about 6 to 10% of all of the visitors over the last couple of months. And just to sort of give you context in case you can't really see the maps, M4Y is sort of the Church Wellesley area. The boundaries are Bay Street to the west, Bloor Street to the north, sort of doing, I believe that's Church Street, and then Carlton Street to the south. And then the second postal code, which is M5A, is sort of the Donlands and the Portlands and the Distillery District. So where we noted it at the beginning in the sort of heat map was one of the major postal codes. Now, does anyone have any questions for the visitor section before we go into the resident data analysis? Seeing none, we will continue on to the resident analysis. So again, here we'll sort of start with a brief description of what a resident means in this case. So the definition is a resident is someone within this trade area that has gone further than 500 meters from their home. So this is specifically looking at their mobility and sort of what residents are doing when they're leaving their house. So again, this is the 2 kilometer radius from Yonge College, and what we're looking at today. And then here, similar to the previous map, is sort of a heat map of where which residents were sort of out and about between September 2021 and February 2022. And the darker the color, the closer to red it is, the more people came from those particular areas. You'll see that it's all yellow, which sort of means that all of the area, there wasn't one specific area that more residents were more out and about than the other areas. It was all sort of, everyone was out and about at sort of a similar level. Now, in terms of some of the demographics of the residents that were out and about, we do have over 100,000 residents within a 10-minute walk of downtown Yonge. And we saw a 47% increase in residents out and about when we compared it to the previous year, so September 2020 to February 2021, which is great. I think everyone can kind of see that even in their own lives. They're probably spending more time out, going out and doing various errands and various outings. The demographics for the residents that were out and about also didn't change too much during the pandemic. It was an average 1 to 2 person household, university degree, white collar, and the household maintainer is also under 44 years old, similar to what the visitors were. In terms of other data points, as of February 2022, 14% of those households have children at home, which is significantly lower than the visitor ones. So the visitors, we had 36% of the households that had children at home. And then the average household income for the residents that were out and about was $131,000. So pretty similar to what the visitors' household income was as well. Now, what are residents doing when they're out? This was also really interesting to see the shifts of the movement patterns as the pandemic was sort of going on. When we start off pre-pandemic, so this is for 2019, the furthest distance from their homes was about 6 to 8 kilometers. The average time spent away from their home was 153 minutes. And we saw 75% of the trips were to commercial spaces. When we looked at the sort of early pandemic time, which was March 2020 to February 2021, we saw that the furthest distance from our home decreased quite a bit to 4 to 5 kilometers, as opposed to the 6 to 8 kilometers previously. The average time spent away from their home also decreased to 92 minutes. However, the percentage of trips to commercial spaces actually increased slightly to 78%. And that really kind of was indicative to people only going out for those essential trips to do their groceries, do their going to their services, just kind of doing the essential trips to be going outside, and that was kind of it. When we look at sort of the mid-pandemic timeline, which was February 2021 to September 2021, we saw that the furthest distance from their homes actually increased slightly. This was sort of related to the restrictions easing. Vaccinations were sort of kicking into high gear at this point. So we saw the furthest distance from their home was 7.5 kilometers, as opposed to the 4 to 5 previously. The average time spent away from their home increased quite a bit to 143 minutes. And the percentage of trips to commercial spaces stayed about the same at 72%. It dipped slightly, but really kind of stayed around the same level. Now, when we look at these data points now, so during early recovery in September 2021 to February 2022, we saw a really great increase in all of these data points. The furthest distance from their home is actually now 8.5 kilometers, which is actually slightly higher than what it was pre-COVID in 2019. The average time spent away from their home is now 182 minutes, which again is even higher than what it was pre-COVID. And the percentage of trips to commercial spaces stayed around the same level at 70%. So overall, it was really interesting to see these shifts of what's sort of been happening throughout the pandemic. And we're really kind of seeing that recovery and those numbers are really kind of increasing, and it's a really, really great sign, and we're really excited about it. Now, this particular chart, there's a lot going on, so we'll kind of go through it, but this is sort of looking at the purpose of their trips. So here, we've got between March 2020 to February 2021 to kind of contextualize what happened during the early pandemic. So this chart specifically looks at the percentage change year on year of what their purpose of their trip was. So you'll see there at the top, we've got all of the months between March and February. The orange line is the visits to commercial locations. The blue line is visits to parks and green spaces, and the gray line is the use of heavy rail transit. And then we've included at the bottom there a short timeline to sort of contextualize what was happening at the time, so you can kind of understand why these percentage changes were happening. And you'll see that from March 2020 to February 2021, it was all largely negative percentage changes from the previous year, because obviously we saw huge changes in the patterns of residents. The only thing that didn't change too much, which was noted in the previous slide as well, is the visits to commercial locations. We actually saw that stay fairly stable and consistent throughout the majority of the pandemic. It did dip slightly at the very beginning, but stayed relatively the same throughout the rest of the year. Visits to parks and green spaces decreased slightly again at the earlier the pandemic, and then increased slightly through the summertime and through the warmer months, as we normally would see, and then a slight decrease as the weather sort of got colder. The biggest one here to note is the use of heavy rail transit, and that is subway usage. You'll see that these numbers really were very low. So the sort of the peak here is in May of 2020, where we saw a 70% decrease in residents using heavy rail transit for their trips outside of the house. Obviously, that did increase over time, but it really kind of stayed in that 50 to 70% decrease from the previous year. It stayed pretty consistent throughout the early pandemic. When we look at the same chart for March 2021 to February 2022, you'll see that lots of positive numbers here, positive percentage changes. Again, you'll see those months in the middle there, March 2021 to February 2022. The lines are the same, so you'll see that the blue line is visits to parks and green spaces, the gray line is use of heavy rail transit or subway, and that orange line is visits to commercial locations. And then of course we've included there a small timeline as well to kind of better understand what was going on at the time. So when we look at the visits to commercial locations, again, just as we had noted previously, that stayed largely consistent overall. There wasn't too much of a percentage change going on there. People were visiting commercial spaces as they were prior to COVID-19 as well. You'll see that the gray line, the use of heavy rail transit, we really saw an increase there of people starting to be more comfortable using the subway or starting to need to use the subway for their outings. Really kind of started to happen in the summertime in August when vaccinations were really kicking into high gear. Capacity limits were removed in October of 2021. So we really kind of saw that happening as sort of early recovery was beginning. The visits to parks and green spaces, again, we really saw that kind of bump up in May of 2021 and continued to grow as the capacity limits and as restrictions were easing and as people were feeling more comfortable to be outside and see people. And interestingly enough, even through February 2022, we saw that still a lot of people were visiting parks and green spaces, even though it was the dead of winter and very, very cold outside. Now, any questions on the visitor or the resident piece before we move into another data set, which is the Safe and Inclusive Survey? I don't see any, Pauline. So I will hand it over to Pauline for this piece.
Thank you, Susie. So straight into Safe and Inclusive, here's a little bit of context. In 2018, we started to do regular surveys looking at how do perceptions of safety and a sense of welcome, how do they impact on the attractiveness of the neighborhood? How do they impact on the way that people make decisions? How do they impact on the businesses? How do they impact from a crime perspective? Let's start to understand some of those factors. So the first survey was rolled out in 2018. We partner on this with Dr. Doug Thompson, who is a professor at the criminal justice program at Humber College. He designs it, he crunches the numbers, and then we're the ones who promote it and try and get obviously the most respondents that we can. So we've been doing that since 2018. We currently run it in September of every year, and we have currently, of course, 5 years of data. So we're developing a pretty interesting data set. I'm also just going to flag that Susie mentioned earlier that we have just recently completed a member survey, and of the top 3 concerns that members had in this neighborhood for recovery, one of them was safety and security. So this survey is taken on even more importance as we look at how can we support members, member businesses, as we move forward through recovery. So this data that we're going to look at today is just a very quick snapshot from the September of 2021 survey. And we require for it to be statistically significant, we need to get at least 600 responses. And every year we get an average of between 800 and 1,200 responses to the survey. So even last year when we were still, in the middle of the pandemic, Omicron hadn't quite started yet, we still got 800 responses from residents, employees, from visitors, from business owners and property owners and other area stakeholders, many of whom were not actually working out of the area at that time. So here's the slide that we think encapsulates the most important piece. Dr. Thompson always says that what he finds fascinating about this neighborhood is that it's very much a reference to Charles Dickens. It's a tale of 2 cities, that people are very comfortable here during the day when it's busy and light and active and crowded and bustling and busy and everything's open. But the sense of safety tends to decline after hours when it gets darker and more quiet and less crowded. This particular data that we're showing you here is the question that goes out in the survey is, would you encourage loved ones to come to this area to do a number of different things? And the blue line is no, and the red line on the chart is yes. So starting at the bottom, to shop or dine during the day, 85% of respondents said absolutely yes, we would come to this area to do that. 15% said no. To shop or dine at night, you can see that there is less enthusiasm. So it's a much more even split. 49 said no, 51 said yes. So it's about a half-half split. To work, absolutely. 76% of respondents would encourage friends and family to come and work in this neighborhood, but 24% would not. For live, it's a fairly even split as well. About 51% said no, they wouldn't encourage people that are their loved ones to live in this neighborhood, but 49% said yes. And here's the starkest difference. To walk around during the day, 86% of respondents said absolutely, feel safe, no problem, good to go. But that bar completely flips around when you ask about walking around at night, where 77% of people say no, they would not walk around at night. So a lot of the initiatives that we have as Downtown Yonge, a lot of the safe and inclusive programs that we have in place are very much in response to this idea of day versus night and safety and inclusion. And those are all things that we're more than happy to talk more about. But this is the summary that we wanted to give you for today, to be mindful of as you plan going into the summer, what some of the challenges are in those surveys regarding people coming into the neighborhood at different times of the day.
Now,
back to Susie.
Oh,
sorry.
Thank you. So for the retail mix study that we did, we've been doing this since early COVID as well. The data collection included all consumer-facing businesses within the boundaries of the Downtown Yonge BIA. And this included businesses located along Yonge Street, all of the side streets, but the majority of the businesses were located at street level, but we did include a lower level businesses such as the ones in the path, and upper level businesses such as the multiple levels within the Eaton Center or other malls. And this collection specifically was done in February of 2022. So when we look at the split of retail and sort of what the retail landscape looks like in Downtown Yonge, it's actually remained fairly consistent throughout the pandemic, which is great news for us. You'll see here that we've got a pie chart noting the different sectors and what the percentage is. So we'll just start from the right-hand side there. Clothing retail accounts for 19.1% of retail in Downtown Yonge. Other retail is just almost 16%. Food services is our highest sector at almost 32%. And this is actually fairly similar to what it was even pre-COVID. Food services was always our highest sector, along with clothing retailer, and then other services were always the other two that were the top in our area. You'll see here other services is at 20%, so the second highest. And then finally, we've got our vacancy, which includes both the mall and the street front, is sitting at around just under 14%. Now, just as a comparison, our vacancy rate in 2017 was just under 17%. So this is actually not a terrible vacancy rate, especially given what has happened over the last 2 years. 14% is actually a fairly decent number. When we look at where the vacancies are located, you'll see here that the red dots are where vacancies are located, and the sort of the larger the dot, the more vacant space there is there. So you'll see that they're kind of all scattered around the area. There are a few hot spots, but overall, a lot of that is either spaces that have been collected for redevelopment, or just regular cyclical vacancies that are sort of turning over into a different business. So overall, there weren't really any specific areas of note. Yonge and Gerrard, that's sort of the Aura Tower where IKEA was or is going to be opening. So that will no longer be there once it's open. And then you'll see all the other dots are kind of all around the area overall. Now, when we look at the traffic flow analysis, the way this data was collected is by a company called Springboard. We have electronic counters along Yonge Street. We've had them for many years now. We have a total of 12 counters located at the major intersections of the area. And the data we'll be showing you today is we'll look at total traffic overall in June 2021, and then we compare it to February 2022. So we can kind of show you sort of a winter month and then a peak summer month. We've also got the Easter long weekend pedestrian flow counts, so we can see how the last long weekend held up between 2019 and 2022. And lastly, we'll look at the pedestrian flows in January to April, and we'll look at 2019 to 2022 as well, so we can see kind of what has happened over the pandemic. So here you'll see the split of the total traffic on Yonge Street for February of this year. You'll see that pedestrians accounted for just under 82% of all traffic in the area. Vehicles accounted for 16%. Bicycles were 0.27%. Commercial vehicles at 1.35%, and buses at 0.47%. Now you'll notice that when we show you here the June 2021 data, it actually doesn't really shift all that much, even though February, you know, is a very cold month in Toronto, always very snowy. The pedestrian to vehicle ratio is actually always pretty much the same. It stays fairly consistent. And we saw that even pre-COVID, most of the time, the pedestrians accounted for around 70 to 80% of the total traffic on Yonge Street, and the vehicles accounted for the last 20% there. So you'll see here for June 2021, we saw pedestrians accounted for just under 78%. Vehicles were just under 19% at 18.89. Bicycles were a little bit higher at 1.06%. Commercial vehicles were at 2%, and then buses were at 0.53%. So you'll see that overall throughout the year, it definitely stays relatively consistent as to how many pedestrians and vehicles and the split of who is in the area. Now, when we look at the Easter long weekend, so we look at Friday to Monday, and we've again looked at 2019 to this year, 2022. Obviously, 2019 was the highest. We saw just under 700,000 pedestrians between Friday and the Monday long weekend. In 2022, Easter was sort of the first big holiday affected by COVID-19. So we saw a huge decrease there, an 85% decrease year on year, the Easter long weekend. 2021, I believe there were still restrictions around for Easter in 2021, but definitely less restrictive than in 2020. So we saw 113% increase from 2020 to 2021. And then very excitingly, 2022, we saw a pretty large increase again from 2021 as restrictions were sort of eased and people could sort of do as they pleased. We saw 150% increase year on year, and we saw just over 500,000 pedestrians on Yonge Street in that time frame. We didn't reach the same level that it was in 2019, but as the recovery continues, I believe that we've already started to see these numbers slowly increasing and getting close to pre-COVID numbers. So this will definitely get better as the years go on. Now, when we look at January to April, and specifically looking at 2019 to 2022, you'll see here that 2019 are these blue bars. 2020 is the orange. So you'll see that January and February stayed relatively consistent, and even March sort of was when everything happened. So a huge decrease in our pedestrians there in March of 2020, and again, April, an even bigger decrease. 2021 is that gray bar. You'll see that again, just like we noted before, January and February and March of 2021 were all fairly low, and April was sort of when things started to go up a little bit higher. We were seeing vaccinations sort of starting in that summer. So really kind of the story was sort of told for 2021 in the latter half of that year. For 2022, you'll see here that in January, we saw an increase in pedestrian flows. We saw a 91% increase this year compared to 2021. In February, an even greater increase as sort of things were opening up and people were feeling better being outside and being in businesses. We saw just over 200% increase in 2022 when we compared it to 2021. And that was just under 3 million pedestrians. In March, again, another huge increase there. We saw just over 118% increase in 2022 compared to 2021, and that number was sitting at just over 4 million pedestrians. And lastly, when we look at April, again, that's where the biggest increase came at 237% increase in 2022 when we compared it to 2021, and that's sitting at just under 4 million pedestrians for that month for the previous month. Now, the last piece we'll be looking at here is the member survey. So this member survey, we did this collection in February. So the survey was available from February 11th of this year to February 28th, 2022. We distributed the survey via the e-blast to all of our members, as well as through social media. We opened the survey up to all business owners, managers, property managers, and employees, and we received a total of 125 responses for this particular survey. So we'll go through just two of the main questions we sort of wanted to share with you and sort of encapsulated as the summary overall of this survey. So this first one here is when we asked businesses to think of the overall state of their business when we compared it to February 2021, so the previous year. And we asked them if they would say that their business is now much better off than a year ago, somewhat better off, about the same, much worse off, or don't know. So you'll see here that almost 40% of our businesses indicated that they were better off in some capacity than the previous year before, so either much better off or somewhat better off. But we did have almost 35% of businesses indicate that they were about the same in February 2022 as they were in February 2021. Now, in February 2022, things were pretty much open up again, but really there was still hesitation as to people feeling comfortable being outside or going out to eat or going out to restaurants. So we did still see some hesitation there. Now, this particular question, we wanted to understand what members would like to see from us and what would help them most during the recovery. So we asked them if they thought that there should be more, less, or about the same of each of the following. And here we'll note that we've only included the much more and the more. So much more is indicated by those green bars and the more is indicated by the blue bars. So you'll see that sort of the top pieces that members wanted us to really focus on, which Pauline had sort of mentioned earlier, is advertising to draw visitors as well as residents. So those are these two middle bars here from other areas into our area. The other piece is incentivizing people to attract, to come back to the area. And the last piece is also advocacy at all levels of government for the business needs. Those were sort of the main pieces that, not just in this question, but were peppered throughout the entire survey overall. These were the main pieces of interest for recovery. And then you'll see here that safety and security is also very high on that list as well. Any questions on those pieces before we move on to the final piece, which is the follow-up handout and then the upcoming data updates? I don't see any questions. So we'll just go through this quickly. This is what the follow-up handout you'll be receiving. We're starting an economic newsletter, which will go out a couple of times a year. And then in between, we'll be sending out data specifically on the traffic flows in our area. So looking at both pedestrian and vehicle counts. But this economic newsletter basically has a summary of what we've discussed today, some data around the member survey, visitor trends, the resident mobility analysis. Essentially everything that we went through today, you'll see in this economic newsletter summarized in I believe it's a 3-page document. So it's a little bit of an easier read and easier share for your employees or your other managers and your owners. And then in terms of upcoming data updates, the Environics data that we get specifically around resident and visitor analysis, these we've been getting biannual updates, and these will continue into next year, into 2023. The SRA occupancy index is updated semi-monthly, so we'll be seeing that updated throughout the next couple of months as we go through the recovery. The retail mix study, we are looking to update it in June to kind of have a better understanding of what's happened after the beginning of the recovery and if anything has changed dramatically. And we will be offering this presentation with these updates again in the third quarter of 2022 with all the updates along with an updated economic newsletter. And as I mentioned before, we'll be sharing a regular traffic flow analysis via new member e-blast, and those will kind of show the different weekend numbers, sort of what the weekends were looking like, and kind of give you an understanding of what's happening through the recovery ahead. So I believe that's it, right on time for any questions or comments or feedback. We'd love to hear from you all.
I'm also just going to add that we did say we'd be done in 45 minutes. So if you do have to leave, we completely understand, and don't hesitate if you want to email us after the fact. We're only an email or a phone call away. But are there any questions from the floor? Also welcome to put it in the chat box. I'm not sure. There you go. Go, Dan.
Hi, so I had a quick question.
Please.
Given what happened in Buffalo over the weekend, do we have in place a response to, I guess, emergency service response? So in real time, so if something's happening at Yonge and Dundas or at the Cineplex or something, that we have a community communication and a plan to action if something serious was happening at one of these locations, so we would know to close down our business and whatnot, and how to handle that within our community?
So I can give you two specific responses. The one is that I always recommend that all of the businesses in this area, members, stakeholders, follow on Twitter Toronto Police Services Ops feed. So that's, I believe it's TPS Ops on Twitter. They provide all information that they are able to make publicly available in any situation that is unfolding. So that would be my number one recommendation. The second one is, and I know we touched on it briefly when we chatted this week, but also for the benefit of the rest of the team, we do, the rest of the audience, we do have a dedicated program in this neighborhood called the Young Neighborhood Community Officer Program. It's the only one in the city that provides 8 dedicated officers across 2 divisions, 2 police divisions, to a specific neighborhood. So we have 8 officers and 2 sergeants that are embedded in this neighborhood. I would very, very strongly recommend that if you don't already have contacts from them, please let us know. We do quite often put it on our social media feeds. We do hand it out with them at different points during the year. But of course, you know, with COVID, we may be a bit behind on those things. So if that's something that you're interested in, we can absolutely make the connection, because again, they're dedicated to this neighborhood and they are 7 days a week. So those would be my first 2 points of contact with regard to emergency response. And of course, in an emergency that's emergent, 911 is always the most important first reaction. Julian, I'm not sure if you want to add anything from the point of view of the square, but it's a very good question, Dan.
Yeah, and many of us now have quite a good network of other security, heads of security, managers of security in the malls, and so we often share information. In each week also, Lisa Yule in the police department shares a list each Friday to the police and the community at large on expected protests and other gatherings, and also on major events and farmers markets and all that sort of activity. So there's quite a good passing on network of information. But yeah, sort of an incident like Buffalo is so traumatic and so completely unexpected. Yeah. For sure, and maybe we all have to somehow work out a plan for a quick method of exchange and or support and follow up afterwards. Yeah. The other piece also that folks might not know of on this call, and Pauline and her team have done a fantastic job, along with the Downtown East Area Action Plan Group. The police have also set up with the city a 211 number. So it's a crisis line. So it's trying to avoid the escalation to police level. And the Gerstein Crisis Center have been operating that in a pilot scheme in the downtown core. So either you as the person in crisis or a person you see in crisis, you can call 211 rather than 911, and a different kind of support from housing to addiction to all sorts of mental health supports are made available to that person in crisis. I will stop.
Thank you, Julian. And I'm just going to add, because it's an important point, is that our community engagement team, which currently operates 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. Monday to Friday, they will be expanding to a 7-day-a-week schedule starting at the beginning of July. We're just firming up the details of that, but their primary focus is on the businesses and community stakeholders in the Yonge and Dundas neighborhood. So look out for that information too. Any other questions? Because I do want to be mindful of time, and we are, of course, a few minutes over. I'll take that as either very good or very bad. I choose very good. Susie, thank you so much. Very much appreciate all your hard work in this. Thank you everyone who attended. I hope that you've taken away something that is of use to your business, and I hope that we see you often in the neighborhood over the summer, out and about, and getting lots of foot traffic. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all.